I'm very happy to welcome you all to the Virtual French Institute on a very special day. I think I'm supposed to speak French as well. So, bienvenue à tous. Je suis la directrice de l'Institut français d'Écosse et consul général à Édimbourg et Glasgow. Et je suis vraiment très heureuse de vous accueillir ce soir, un jour très particulier puisque nous sommes le 8 mars, jour international pour le droit des femmes, que l'on célèbre à travers le monde avec diverses manifestations, l'occasion de faire un peu un bilan chaque année de la situation des femmes et des progrès qui ont été faits en matière d'égalité entre les femmes et les hommes. Et il y a eu des progrès, mais il reste encore beaucoup à faire, je pense. C'est aussi le 8 mars l'occasion de mettre à l'honneur des femmes d'exception. Et ces femmes d'exception, elles sont nombreuses. Ce serait trop long pour on passerait la soirée et la nuit probablement à toutes les citer, et je suis sûre que j'en oublierai. Mais je citerai Habiba Sarabi, qui est une femme politique en Afghanistan, à laquelle on vient de remettre, le ministre des Affaires étrangères français, le prix Simone Veil de la République française, qui a été décerné par le président de la République. Et donc, quelle plus belle occasion pour nous, à l'Institut français, que cette journée pour mettre à l'honneur et rendre hommage à l'une de ces femmes d'exception, une jeune femme, même une très jeune femme, française et britannique, qui très tôt s'est engagée pendant la Seconde Guerre mondiale aux côtés des résistants, de ceux qui luttaient, et notamment au sein des services secrets britanniques dont vous avez très certainement tous entendu parler, SOE, pour Special Operations Executive, une organisation très masculine d'ailleurs à l'époque, puisque si je ne me trompe pas, finalement il y a eu 55 femmes qui ont été recrutées pour servir, et pour servir très souvent soit dans des tâches administratives, mais bientôt, et je crois que c'est un petit peu l'exception ou l'originalité aussi de cette partie féminine, pour être envoyée comme transmetteur, opérateur sur les scènes de théâtre, comme on dit dans le jargon militaire, et pour aider à monter des réseaux de résistance en Europe. Et la section F était dédiée à la France. Et c'est dans cette section F que cette jeune femme, que tout destinait à être heureuse et avoir une longue vie, probablement entre la France et le Royaume-Uni, ces deux patries. Elle s'est engagée, et elle a été parachutée, donc elle a fait vraiment des actes de courage extraordinaires. Et je crois qu'à travers elle, c'est non seulement à ces 55 femmes du SOI que nous rendons hommage, mais à toutes celles et qui, par leur courage, leur intelligence, leur détermination, ont contribué à rendre notre monde tel qu'il est, et surtout à nous rendre la liberté, et sans pour autant être sur le devant de la scène. Jamais. Donc je suis encore une fois très heureuse que nous puissions mettre à l'honneur cette jeune femme, moins connue que d'autres grands noms, mais tout aussi valeureuse, tout aussi importante. Et je remercie très chaleureusement le professeur Robert Crawford et Paul Malgrati pour être avec nous ce soir, pour non seulement nous parler de Violette, mais nous parler aussi de ce magnifique ouvrage qu'ils ont rédigé, vous, professeur Crawford, et admirablement traduit, Paul, et qui m'a personnellement beaucoup touchée. Donc, merci beaucoup. Je vais passer la parole à Catherine, qui vous en présentera un petit peu plus longuement nos deux éminents hôtes. Merci à vous.
Bonsoir et bienvenue à l'Institut français. Donc, je suis Catherine Guillat, je suis la médiathécaire de l'Institut français. Et comme le disait Laurence Pailly, c'est effectivement une joie de vous avoir tous les deux ce soir, Robert Crawford et Paul Malgrati, pour cette présentation de ce magnifique poème, Curriculum Violette. Donc, Robert Crawford, c'est très difficile d'esquisser votre vie littéraire en quelques mots. Bon, vous êtes actuellement professeur d'anglais à l'université de St Andrews, spécialiste de la littérature anglaise du XVIIIe siècle, début du XIXe siècle, spécialiste en particulier de Robert Burns. Vous vous êtes aussi intéressé aux poètes plus contemporains, avec en particulier cette magnifique biographie de T.S. Eliot que nos auditeurs ont probablement lu. Hein. Et vous avez aussi une œuvre de poète remarquable, une œuvre qui s'inspire des paysages écossais, qui s'inspire aussi de la politique, de la société écossaise. Et nous avons aussi, et donc bien sûr, Curriculum Violette s'inspire de tout cela. Nous aurons l'occasion d'y revenir ultérieurement. Paul Malgrati, merci aussi d'être venu. Donc, Paul Malgrati est diplômé de Sciences Po. Paul Malgrati est arrivé en Écosse il y a 5 ans maintenant pour une thèse de doctorat et depuis, il poursuit ses recherches au sein de l'université de Glasgow. Et Paul donc est aussi le traducteur de ce poème, puisque si l'on regarde, c'est pas très facile avec la caméra, mais voici donc Curriculum Violette et on aura l'occasion d'en discuter, mais vous avez le texte en anglais et la traduction française en parallèle, hein, donc véritablement une œuvre anglo-française. Donc, comme Laurence Païs l'a signalé, donc ce poème finalement célèbre le 100e anniversaire de Violette Szabo. Donc, elle aurait eu 100 ans cette année, mais comme on vous l'a dit, donc sa vie a été très courte puisque engagée dans une mission en France pendant la Deuxième Guerre mondiale, eh bien, elle a été capturée et elle est morte à Ravensbrück. Ce poème est une véritable célébration aussi, ce d'autant plus que finalement, il y a très très peu de choses en français sur Violette Szabo. M'étant renseignée, je me suis rendu compte qu'il y avait beaucoup de livres en anglais, mais en français, malheureusement, Violette Szabo est très très peu connue et c'est une injustice à réparer certainement. Et puis, avant de vous donner la parole, Robert Crawford, donc ce qu'on peut signaler d'ores et déjà, c'est que ce poème se présente sous une forme extrêmement particulière, sous la forme donc de 5 CV. Et on pourrait croire que cette forme est assez stricte, assez sèche, mais en fait c'est un poème qui finalement transmet une très très forte émotion. Donc je vous laisse la parole, peut-être Robert Crawford pour commencer.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Laurence, Catherine, and Paul for making it possible for us to meet and talk about this poem this evening. As Catherine has just explained, the work is structured in the form of 5 CVs. This is a way, I think, of trying to respect the experience of Violette because it's not an experience that I can share, not only because I don't speak French, but also because of the peculiar courage and intensity of her life and her fate, dying in a concentration camp in Germany at the age of 23. So the CV form, which is a form that in some ways refuses access to the deepest inner life, I chose in part as a way of ethically respecting the distance, if you like, between me and Violette. I'm a 21st century man who has not had to fight in a war, and she was an awe-inspiringly courageous 20th century Anglo-French agent. So there's a lot of distance between us. And although the work is trying in some ways to bridge that distance, it is also trying formally to respect that distance. You've heard a little bit about her life. She was born in Paris, but she grew up substantially in London, though her mother was French, her father was English. So as a child, she would move between England and France. And this made her, in some ways, very well suited to become an agent during World War II. She was briefly trained in Scotland, though most of her life was lived in England. I read about her when I was about 10 or 11 in an anthology called Three Great War Stories. I was born in 1959, so I'd be reading about her around about 1970. And her name was then, I think, still better known than it is today. Better known because of the book that I read as a kid, which was called Carve Her Name with Pride, was written by a man called R.J. Minnie, and was turned into a film called Carve Her Name with Pride, though I've never seen the film. Once I decided to try and write this little book, I read another biography of her by a woman called Susan Ottaway. I should say that I wouldn't have written this had I not read a Russian poem in translation by a man called Zavialov, a Russian poet based in Geneva, called Advent, Leningrad, 1941. And this is structured like a diary, but also contains a number of lists. Curriculum Violette is not structured as a diary. As I said, it's structured as a series of CVs. But aspects of what Zavialov had done kind of nurtured my thinking about the way it might be possible to find a different form to tell, in some ways, a verse biography of Violette Szabo. Her name changes. She's born Violette Bushel. She marries a man with a Hungarian surname, Szabo, and then she takes various code names when she is an agent. So each of the CVs has a different name. And yet, as you read them, you'll realize, for instance, from the date of birth, that they are all referring to the same person. I'm just going to read one of these CVs in English now. And the last thing I'll say before I do is that the book has an epigraph from David Hume. It's that famous passage from Hume where he talks about how if he looks into himself, he can perceive a lot of discrete sensations and images, but not something that seems to be a continuous self. And so this way of presenting a life through 5 snapshot CVs is a way, I suppose, of tuning into something that Hume was interested in. I'm going to read the third of the CVs that make up Curriculum Violette. I've chosen this one because this is an event hosted by the French Institute in Edinburgh. And this is the CV in which Violette is training in the Scottish Highlands to be an agent parachuted into France. Name, Mrs. Szabo, telephone Bayswater 6188. Date of birth, 26/6/21. Address, SOE, Inverie, Noidert, Scottish Highlands Protected Area. Date, September 1943. Weather, blustery, sunstruck, parching, torrential, heavy sea. Stations, Euston, Watford Junction, full blackout, pale owl flitting through. Stafford, Crewe, Warrington Bank Quay. Wigan, Preston, milkless tea. Lancaster, Carnforth, Oxenham, distant waterfalls. Penrith, Carlisle, Lockerbie, Carstairs Junction, a Polish sergeant's smile. Motherwell, Glasgow Central, opposite the pillars of the Egyptian halls. Glasgow Queen Street, Dalmuir, chalked walls. Dumbarton Central, sleet. Helensburgh Upper, Gairloch Head, camouflaged wire. Arachern Tarbot, Ardluey, Crean Larach, red coals on waiting room fire. Upper Tindrum, Bridge of Orchy, Rannoch, deer at moor's edge. Carrer, Tullach, Roydridge, geologist pointed out the parallel roads. Spian Bridge, Fort William, dog-eared papers checked. Banavie, Corpach, toads. Lochielside, Glenfinnan, from the viaduct monument to Le Chevalier, Bonnie Prince Charlie. Lochailert, Beesdale, steep drop to platform, Harling. Arisaig, the sea. Morar, sheep. Malig, sudden smell of herring. Mailboat to Inverie. Terrain, a salt course, bog, cliff face, sheep track, Glyn and Duvlochan, Sgwr Corin a Gover, jellyfish, oil, rendezvous, sharp Sgwr na Keich. An Old Story by Robert Louis Stevenson. They'll search Appin with candles, and we must have all things straight. We're digging the bit guns and swords into the moss, you see, and these, I'm thinking, will be your ain French clothes. We'll be to bury them, I believe. Bury my French clothes, cried Allen. Troth, no. And he laid hold upon the packet and retired into the barn to shift himself, recommending me in the meanwhile to his kinsman. James carried me accordingly into the kitchen and sat down with me at table, smiling and talking at first in a very hospitable manner. But presently the gloom returned upon him. He sat frowning and biting his fingers, only remembered me from time to time, and then gave me but a word or two, and a poor smile, and back into his private terrors. His wife sat by the fire and wept, with her face in her hands. Her eldest son was crouched upon the floor, running over a great mass of papers, and now and again setting one alight and burning it to the bitter end. All the while a servant lass with a red face was rummaging about the room in a blind hurry of fear, and whimpering as she went, and every now and again one of the men would thrust in his face from the yard and cry for orders. Training. Silent killing, knife fighting, map reading and compass work, operations planning, explosives, Sten machine carbine instructions not to be published, demolition training, use of cover, stomach crawling, time pencils, parachute preparation, rope work, fieldcraft, pro forma reporting, raid tactics, elementary Morse. Shopping list. Water, oatmeal, salt, whiskey, a wee nip of malt, picklocks, matchbox, rucksack with compass, notebook, pencil, explosives, socks. Prayer, Ave Maria Stella, Dei Mater Alma, atque semper Virgo, Felix Caeli Porta. Sumens illud ave, Gabrielis ore, funda nos in pace, mutans hevae nomen. Hail, star of the sea, God's nourishing mother, eternal virgin, blessed heaven's gate. Taking that prayer from the angel Gabriel, set us in peace, O name-changing Eve. Overheard, remembered. How to stop an engine with one small bag of sand. Your husband died of wounds near Karet el Hamayat, south of El Alamein. Always fight with your fists open, a dram in each hand. Ach, Bruce, another jellyfish as big as Loch Nevis in yon water. Kid mille fortune. You have a daughter. Assessment. Sociable, likeable, painstaking, anxious to please, mature but childish, kind-hearted, temperamental, spirited, speaks French with English accent, very fit, does not realize implications, no definite purpose, lacks foresight, fatalistic mind, rather a puzzle, quite reliable, unsuitable. Distances. Next handhold 2 feet left above Leichen, Barrisdale 6 miles, latitude 57 degrees 99, Malig to Paris 800 miles. Food. Oatmeal, broke a tooth, tin of meat, blubbery like whale, egg sandwiches, pale ale, chicken broth. Awoken by stags up the long glen, gunshots from south-southeast, snoring men, reveille, a curlew's song. Flora and fauna, grass, crackling sticks, bracken with ticks, deer at the pass, midges, 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 bog myrtle, yellow irises, tortoiseshell butterflies, tormentil, sheep's bleached bones, buzzards, blackbirds singing pink, 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 stones, seagulls, dragonflies, beetles, green bugs, slugs, golden eagle against the sun. Things carried, compass, mirror from the roof garden at Derry and Tom's, lace, cigarette case, mother's needle and thread. And I'll hand over to Paul Malgrati to say something about the French translation of that section that he's about to read. But just before I do, I should say that I'm enormously lucky to have been able to work with a young French poet in making this book to exist in both French and English. And although in a sense Paul is the translator, he's also in a sense the co-creator of this book, because it just seemed to me that it needed to exist at once in English and in French to be true to the person that Violette Szabo was. You'll hear in the French translation of what I've just read, what you've heard in English, and maybe it'll dawn on you all the more that although she died at the age of 23, she had lived a great deal by that stage. She had married, she had had a child, she had lost her husband. So each of these CVs is in a sense very tight-lipped, very formal in its order in the way that a CV is, but it's also trying to communicate something of the magnitude of what life has been throwing at Violette. Paul.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Robert. Thanks for the kind word and also for making me a part of this wonderful cross-cultural adventure. I'm going to speak in French for my part. So, bonsoir à tous. C'est un vrai plaisir d'être avec vous virtuellement ce soir pour discuter de ce beau livre, Curriculum Violette, qui a été un véritable bonheur de traduction. Un grand merci à Madame la Consul Générale, Laurence Faïs, ainsi qu'à Madame Catherine Guillat pour l'organisation de cette soirée. D'une certaine manière, toutes les étoiles sont alignées ce soir. Nous sommes avec l'Institut français d'Édimbourg pour la Journée internationale du droit des femmes. Une institution donc et un événement qui ne saurait offrir un meilleur contexte pour commémorer la vie de Violette Szabo, l'héroïne franco-britannique, la jeune femme pleine d'ardeur et de conviction qui donna sa vie pour la lutte contre le fascisme et la barbarie. Je n'avais pas entendu parler de Szabo la première fois que Robert m'a fait part de son projet d'écriture. En tant que citoyen français, depuis longtemps passionné d'histoire, je connaissais plusieurs grands noms de la résistance féminine, certes, depuis Germaine Tillon et Lucie Aubrac, jusqu'à Danielle Casanova ou Cécile Roll-Tanguy. Cependant, je n'avais encore jamais entendu l'histoire tragique de Szabo. On l'a dit, mais je vais le répéter quand même, Szabo, née à Levallois-Perret, puis éduquée à Londres, avant de rejoindre les services secrets britanniques en 1941 et d'être parachutée par 2 fois sur le sol de France, combattant avec l'armée des ombres jusqu'à sa capture en juin 1944 à Salon-la-Tour, en Corrèze. Elle est exécutée d'une balle dans la nuque moins d'1 an plus tard au camp de concentration de Ravensbrück, 3 mois seulement avant la fin de la guerre. Lorsque Robert m'a proposé de traduire son livre, j'ai dit oui, immédiatement. Étant résident écossais depuis plus de 5 ans et très attaché au maintien de l'entente cordiale et autres vieilles alliances entre nos nations, et ce, en dépit de quelques bouleversements récents, c'est avec grand plaisir que j'acceptais son offre. Comme vous l'avez sans doute ressenti déjà à la lecture de l'original, comme vous allez peut-être le sentir plus encore avec la lecture en français, bon, la traduction de Curriculum Violette n'a pas toujours été aisée. Le style du poème, vous vous en rendez peut-être compte maintenant, est tout à fait original, reprenant la forme du CV sur un mode poétique. Comme Robert l'a dit, Violette Szabo a connu plusieurs identités durant sa vie. Violette Bochel, son nom de jeune fille, puis Violette Szabo après son mariage avec Étienne Szabo en 1940, puis Louise, son nom de code, lors de sa première mission en France, et l'alias Vicky Taylor lors de sa dernière mission. Ce que Robert a fait donc, c'est qu'il a dressé 5 CV pour chacune des différentes identités de Violette depuis 1938 jusqu'à 1945. Et ces CV combinent une langue administrative, voilà, la langue du CV, telle qu'on le connaît, recensant les états de service de Szabo, mais le tout est mixé avec un langage du quotidien qui inclut, vous l'avez entendu déjà, des listes de gares, des listes de courses ou des choses vues, entendues. Et enfin, on a aussi une langue plus littéraire, empreinte de citations, de rimes subtiles, d'allitérations, de métaphores et de prières. Tout cela, saupoudré de références propres à la culture britannique, n'a pas toujours rendu la traduction simple, même si la diversité des thèmes, et la créativité, le style, l'esthétique de Robert ont néanmoins permis à l'exercice de demeurer toujours oui, stimulant, enthousiasmant jusqu'au bout. Je vais donc désormais lire le même extrait que Robert a lu en français. Donc, il s'agit du chapitre 3, le chapitre où Violette, Madame Szabo, dont le mari vient de mourir au front, parfait son entraînement militaire dans les hautes terres d'Écosse, avant son premier parachutage en France. Chapitre 3. Nom complet. Madame Szabo, téléphone Bayswater, 6188. Date de naissance, 26/6/21. Adresse, direction des opérations spéciales, Inverie, Knoydart, haute terre d'Écosse, zone protégée. Date, septembre 1943. Météo, rafale de vent, soleil brûlant, très sec, diluvien, mer forte. Gare, Euston, Watford Junction, extinction des feux, vol de hibou pâle. Stafford, Crewe, Warrington Bank Quay, Wigan, Preston, un thé sans lait. Lancaster, Carnforth, Oxenholme, au loin des cascades. Penrith, Carlisle, Lockerbie, Carstairs Junction, sourire d'un sergent polonais. Motherwell, Glasgow Central, face aux piliers de la galerie égyptienne. Glasgow Queen Street, Dalmuir, mur blanchi à la craie. Dumbarton Central, neige fondue. Helensburgh Upper, Gairloch Head, barbelés camouflés. Archer and Tarbet, Ardlew, Crianlarich, boulet de charbon ardent dans la cheminée de la salle d'attente. Tendrum Upper, Bridge of Orkney, Rannoch, serre à la lisière de la lande. Corer, Tullach, Roy Bridge. Un géologue désigne du doigt les routes parallèles. Spianbridge, Fort William, contrôle des papiers cornés. Benvey, Corpach, crapaud. Loch Hillside, Glenfinnan, vu depuis le viaduc, le monument aux chevaliers, Bonnie Prince Charlie. Loch Aylort, Beesdale, raide pour descendre sur le quai, crépi sur les murs. Arisig, la mer, la mer. Morer, mouton. Malig, soudaine senteur de hareng. Bateau postal à Inverie. Terrain. Parcours du combattant, tourbière, flanc de falaise, piste à moutons. Glen and Dovlochen, Sgur Corren and Govar. Méduse, essence. Rendez-vous à 6 heures pétantes à Sgur Nakish. Une vieille histoire par Robert Louis Stevenson. Ils vont fouiller à pain à la bougie. Il faudra qu'on remette tout en ordre. Pour le moment, on enterre ces 2 ou 3 fusils et épées dans la mousse, vous voyez? Et ça, j'y pense. Ça sera vos habits français. Il va falloir les enterrer, je crois bien. Enterrer mes habits français, s'écria Alan. Pardieu, non. Et il saisit le paquet, puis sortira dans la grange pour s'en occuper lui-même, tout en me recommandant à son parent. James obtempéra et me conduisit dans la cuisine avant de s'attabler avec moi, le sourire aux lèvres et la parole affable. Mais bientôt, sa tristesse reprit le dessus. Assis, les sourcils froncés et se rongeant les ongles, il cessait de me prêter attention, sinon pour quelques mots entrecoupés de silence. Le sourire pincé, il retombait aux prises de ses terreurs. Sa femme pleurait, assise au coin du feu, le visage caché dans les mains. Son fils aîné, accroupi sur le sol, triait un gros tas de papier dont il jetait de temps à autre une page dans les flammes, la laissant brûler jusqu'au dernier bruissement. Et pendant tout ce temps, une servante rougeaude, aveuglée par la peur, fouillait précipitamment les quatre coins de la pièce tout en gémissant. À tout instant, l'un des hommes postés dans la cour passait la tête par la porte et criait pour demander des ordres. Entraînement. Assassinat silencieux. Combat au couteau. Lecture de cartes et marche à la boussole. Planification d'opérations. Explosifs. Manuel d'utilisation de la mitraillette Sten, ne pas divulguer. Formation de sapeur, technique de couverture, progression à plat ventre, crayon détonateur, préparation parachutiste, matelotage, technique de campagne, rédaction de rapports pro format, tactique en opération, notion de morse. Liste de courses. Eau, flocon d'avoine, sel, whisky, un petit coup de malt, crochet à serrure, boîte d'allumettes, sac à dos avec boussole, carnet, crayon, explosif, chaussettes. Prière. Ave Maris Stella, Dei Mater Alma, atque semper velgo Felix Celi porta, sumen silud ave, Gabrielis ore, funda nos in pace, mutans hevae nomen. Salut, étoile de la mer, mère nourricière de Dieu, et toujours vierge, bienheureuse porte du ciel recevant cet ave de la bouche de Gabriel, fermissez-nous dans la paix par ce changement du nom d'Ève. Chose entendue, souvenir. Comment arrêter un moteur avec seulement un petit sac de sable? Votre mari est mort des suites de ses blessures près de Karet el Imaimat, au sud d'El Alamein. Ouvre toujours les poings quand tu te bats. Un petit verre dans chaque main. Ah, Bruce, encore une méduse aussi grande que le Loch Nevis là-bas. Que de mille falche. Vous avez une fille. Évaluation. Sociable, sympathique, laborieuse, soucieuse de plaire, mature mais des côtés enfantins, bon cœur, capricieuse, courageuse, parle français avec l'accent anglais. En pleine forme physique, ne se rend pas compte des conséquences de ses actes. Manque d'objectifs précis, manque de clairvoyance, esprit fataliste, difficile à déchiffrer, généralement tout à fait fiable, ne correspond pas aux critères. Distance. La prochaine prise de main est à 1 demi-mètre au-dessus de la touffe de lichen. Barrisdale, à 6 miles. Latitude 57,99 °. Maleg, Paris, 800 miles. Nourriture. Flocon d'avoine, une dent cassée. Corned beef, bien graisseux, genre baleine. Sandwich aux œufs, bière blonde, bouillon de poulet. Réveillé par cerfs en haut du long vallon. Coup de feu au-dessus de sud-est. Ronfleur, clairon sonnant le réveil. Le chant d'un courlis. Faune et flore. Herbe, craquement de tige. Fougère et tique. Cerf en haut du col. Moucheron, 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 moucheron. Myrte des marais, iris jaune, vanesse de l'ortie, tormentille, os de mouton blanchi, buse, merle, il chante pink, pink, pink. Pierre, mouette, libellule, scarabée, bestiole verte, limace, aigle royal face au soleil. Accessoires. boussole, miroir provenant du toit terrasse de Derry et Toms, dentelle, étui à cigarette, fil à aiguille de maman. Thank you very much, everyone. I suppose from now on, we're just happy to receive any questions. If you'd like to ask them, you can use the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself to ask your question as well, if you so wish. Je répète en français à partir de...
Merci Paul.
Ah, c'est bon, c'est bon.
Ça y est, je vais... Ouais. Non, merci beaucoup pour ces magnifiques lectures. C'est vraiment un texte très très fort. Et donc oui, si vous avez des questions, any question in English or in French?
This is often the most embarrassing and difficult in poetry readings. Yeah, when everyone's in the same room, you know, usually money has changed hands and there will be someone who has been bribed to ask the first question. I think we perhaps haven't been quite as cunningly organized as that.
Yeah.
I realize that, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
You should be able to just unmute yourself and ask the question directly.
You can unmute.
Yes. I'm not sure whether I've got a question yet, but I was fascinated by all the detail and the structure. And curiously, I was reminded of the poem by Jacques Prévert, or rather, is it a poem? His book is called Exercice de style.
Queneau.
Was that Queneau? Or what?
Queneau.
Queneau or Prévert?
Queneau.
Okay. Queneau, yes, le mathématicien. That's him. Where he retells the same story. Now, this isn't retelling the same story, except it is in a way. It's taking a same structure to tell a story 5 times over, which follows on. I mean, that's a really interesting way of doing it. I found it fascinating and kept my attention the whole way through. And there are all sorts, you know, the weather, you know, and every one of my age remembers the weather forecast and the way that the weather forecast just before midnight, I think it used to be, which took all of the weather stations and said how many yards or half miles or miles of visibility there were, whether it was raining or whether it was misty, or what visibility was, and so on. And so it at each point, the different bit of the curriculum vitae, the different heading, recalls something of my and other surely other people's life. And then there are there's the tragic things that come up from time to time. So I wonder, you know, I when you're writing something, you don't know how people are going to react, and I've just given a few of my reactions, and wonder how the two authors who were looking at it from different ways in different languages, I wonder how they react to that, and whether my reaction is a purely personal one, or whether they've heard other reactions which are a little bit similar.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Jeff, not just for breaking the ice, but also for saying something that I should have said, which is that each of these CVs has the same headings. So each has name and date of birth and weather and stations. So you get a sense, for instance, that Violette Szabo is traveling across Britain and then traveling across France and then traveling across Germany just by the kind of litany of stations. When you're talking, I think, about weather forecasts and about the shipping
forecast,
which,
that was what it was called,
I guess used to be much more familiar to people listening to the radio. I think often people writing poetry like litanies of various kinds, and I can think of a number of English language poems that relate to the shipping forecast. Perhaps the best known one is by Carol Ann Duffy. Weather, I suppose, in a military context, and particularly in the context of World War II, is something that was clearly important strategically. Just when you were talking, I was realizing that a few years ago in Edinburgh, my wife and I did go to a rather good play that was on at the Lyceum called Pressure. It was written by David Haig, and it was about the meteorologist who happened to be Scottish.
I saw that.
Who was in charge of the weather forecasting before D-Day. And of course, it was absolutely crucial whether or not the invasion went ahead, just as to how rough or how calm the sea would be. So this man who had to make a very finely calibrated judgment was under huge pressure in making that judgment about, if you like, barometric pressure. So I wasn't conscious of that till you said it, but certainly weather is deliberately present. I haven't read, because I can't really read French without a parallel text, the French poem that you mentioned, but I have read an amount of contemporary French poetry, but by different poets. I used to edit a magazine, co-edit a magazine, along with David Kinlaw, who is probably the most francophile of contemporary French poets, and we brought Yves Bonnefoy to read in connection with the magazine, and we brought to Edinburgh Michel Deguy, who read with Sorley MacLean. This is quite a long time ago now, but I read a lot of Deguy's poetry in parallel text, and it kind of confirmed a sense that I suppose I have, which is that French poetry is, and has been for the last century or more, just very excitingly experimental. So somehow, in a vestigial way, just writing about this French woman and thinking, well, it would be nice if this became more French, I suppose encouraged me to experiment. But I'm probably stereotyping terribly there, so it's probably about time that I hand over to Paul to talk about the French side of things. Well, thank you very much for breaking the ice, Jeff.
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Robert. And yes, thanks, Jeff, very much for that intervention indeed. I must agree with you, Robert. I mean, I was thinking about that the other day, in fact, that most of contemporary French poetry is very much out there in terms of experimentation and has retained very few of the French classical forms, whilst here in Britain, there's been much more of a preservation of the, you'll find your iambic pentameter and these kind of rhythms still very much as an integral part of what is being produced today, although some people try to get away from it, whilst in France, the old Alexandrines, l'Alexandrin is long disappeared. So yes, Jeff. Well, the part of your reaction that I enjoyed, I mean, I enjoyed all of it, but the part that spoke more to me, suppose, is when you were speaking of about the style of the narrative in a way, and how the CV form allows for uh, a lot of minute impressions to be distilled through the list that we've got, through the quotations. And I remember it's a conversation we had with Robert at the time, around just after he'd written the piece and when I was translating it, about just that notion of biography. And Robert touched on that. And Robert is a very accomplished and well known for his biographies of, and Catherine mentioned it, of Robert Burns and T.S. Eliot especially. Uh, and there is here, I think, a very, yeah, a very novel and a very gripping reflection, yes, reflection about biography, about how the way, you tell someone's life when you're so removed from their context and from their experience. And as I am convinced now that this new form, I don't know if there will be a legacy of this form. It would be nice if there were, of the biographical poetic CV, because it is such a concise but also extremely respectful way. I, 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 I would think, and I'm not here blowing my own trumpet, because I'm just the translator here, and this is Robert who came up with this idea. Um, but I think it is a very respectful way to tell someone's life. And as my second hat here being academic, human sciences, social sciences as well, a little bit. Part of a classic reflection in human sciences, yes, especially when dealing with biographies. How do you tell someone's life? How, is there not something a bit of a biographical fallacy or illusion? How can you ever tell someone's life? How can you call a book a biography? Well, I think Curriculum Violette is a very elegant attempt to come to terms with that question, and telling the life of Violette, but in a way which is very impressionistic. This is by little touches, and there is still a lot of obscurity and unknown, but that's perhaps where the beauty lies, I would say.
Mhm. We have another question. So no, I thought we had a chat. Yes. Well, I don't know if it's a question. It's Donella Kirkland, just to say thank you for a moving tribute to the sort of woman I am so impressed by. A fitting celebration on International Women's Day.
That's a very, if I may say so, that's a very tactful comment and generous one, but thank you. I don't know about you, Paul, but I was slightly weary of the idea of doing this on International Women's Day. To have two men coming on is probably not necessarily what you would expect, or possibly even what you'd approve of. But in a funny way, that connects maybe with what Paul was saying there, that this writing this, which is published, by the way, by Molecular Press in Geneva. So you have to Google Curriculum Violette Molecular Press if you want to track it down. Writing it almost comes out of both a wish to experiment in terms of form and verse form, but also the frustrations involved in writing biography. If you're writing a biography of Robert Burns or of that rather different poet T.S. Eliot, you have to accept at some level that you cannot get inside their head, and you have to realize that sometimes you just shouldn't fake it. It's perhaps even more difficult if you're writing I don't know. Maybe it isn't. But I was going to say it might be more difficult even if you're writing about someone of the opposite sex. And so the form of the curriculum vitae is a way of kind of allowing for all the blanks. You know, poetry and CVs demand a lot of blank space, a lot of white paper, and that in this work is probably part of the point.
Another question? Yes.
Yeah.
Sarah.
I see in the chat someone saying did I do a lot of research? Yes, yes and no. You know, I fessed up at the beginning and said, yes, I read 2 books. I also did or attempted to do rather a lot of research on the French railway network during World War II. Which I'm not absolutely sure how accurate every station that I have her pass through is, because complicated things have happened to the French railways over the last few decades, as they have to British railways. Some of the lists, the documents in Curriculum Violette are pretty much transposed from biographical accounts. We know, for instance, that she bought a number of dresses in Paris. It's not the sort of thing that you necessarily expect a World War II agent parachuted into France to do. You know, to go into a dress shop and buy a dress or a jersey. But she did this, and so the details of those things that she bought are absolutely true to the historical record. Do I know that she read Robert Louis Stevenson's Kidnapped? No, I don't. Do I know that she knew about Joan of Arc when she was a child? No, I don't. But I think it very, very probable that a French girl growing up partly in France and partly in England would have heard about Joan of Arc. So just as in the section we read just now, there's a little extract from Stevenson. So in the first of the CVs, there's a little extract from Andrew Lang's biography of Joan of Arc. So some of these materials that are collaged into the text are there to sort of give a sense of stories, of narratives that might have contributed to the formation of someone who went on to become this rather awe-inspiringly heroic figure. We can't explain it fully, but some of the stuff's there just to try and hint at that.
Another question by Mrs. Sarah Heinz, please.
Alors, bonsoir à tous, Madame la Consul, Monsieur Malgrati et Professor Crawford, good evening. Can I just say I enjoyed the readings very much, and I loved the fact that your initial inspiration was as a small boy when you read Carve Her Name with Pride, because I was also, that was my first encounter with Violette Szabo as a child. And I remember thinking how thrilling, because it was the first time I was aware of a female character, and it was even better the fact she actually existed. You know, it was the first time I saw a woman doing brave, adventurous things. So it has stayed with me all my life. I've had a bit of a Violette obsession as well. And I absolutely love the juxtaposition of the Scottish elements because of all the training. There were all these places like Arisaig and what have you. I love the fact that initially, from the way it sounded, it to me seemed reminiscent of a military record, you know, a personnel record.
Yes. I wanted to sound a bit like that. Yeah.
And then I had the feeling, as you got, you know, further into the poem, I had visions of her kind of hanging on to, you know, battling with Scottish wildlife as she undertook her fairly grueling training. So I look forward to reading your actual work, which Actually, I've just checked. It's also available on Amazon, I think. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that.
It's fabulous. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I do share very much your reaction to reading this as a child, to an extent. I think, if I'm very honest, as a little boy, I was excited by the story, and it didn't strike me as much as it does now that this was a story about a girl and a woman.
For me, it was hugely. Yeah.
Sure, I can see that. I think it probably strikes me slightly differently when I come back as an adult and read it. The truth is that my memory of reading it in childhood, I'd completely forgotten that she'd ever been to Scotland. And it was only when I went back that I was rather fascinated and excited by the fact that she had connections with Arisaig, which is a place that I know, and then we ended up going to Inverie, which seems to be where she actually did the training. But I'd forgotten all that. So I sometimes, kind of encountering a story at different periods in your life, it's like there are several levels that build up. It's great. It's great also encountering someone who already knows her story. I think perhaps as you go down the generations, if I may put it that way, people a lot younger than me in Britain have never heard of her. I was slightly taken aback to start with, the number of people when I was mentioning this to a few folk, they didn't know who she was at all. I think she may be slightly better remembered in France.
Well, according to what everyone said, it didn't seem that way. No.
No, she's not very well known in France, absolutely not. I found a few biographies, I mean, in English, but in French, no, definitely not.
Someone told me there had been at least one radio program about her recently. This is her centenary year, 2021, centenary of her birth. So,
yeah.
Thank you.
Another question by Mrs. Jean Fraser. So it's a chat. I haven't read it yet, but given the trials that Violette went through towards the end of her life, was it in any way demoralizing as an undertaking, and how were you left feeling?
I think I'm just left feeling, as I say, kind of awestruck. I don't know quite how else to put it. I knew, because I'd known the story since childhood, it wasn't new to me. I knew how it ended. That was just one of the things that makes her life and her story so impressive. It's only one of the things, but it is undeniably one of the things. So I knew that's what this work would have to be about in part. I wanted the last of the CVs deals with her journey to Ravensbrück and her experience there. And again, I think I wanted it to be quite tight-lipped, almost bureaucratic, a sense, if you like, of the kind of military bureaucratization of death. So events happen rather abruptly and suddenly in that last CV, as perhaps some of them do in the one that you just heard. I don't know whether Paul, who I guess came to the story of Violette at a different age, didn't know it as a child. I don't know whether you've got any take on that, Paul.
Robert, thanks very much, Jean, as well. Yes, it's a tough one, really. I don't know. I suppose the way that made me feel is, I'm just a little bit older than the age Violette was when she died, about 4 years older. So I'm already older than the age she was, which which can't help but strike me. But perhaps there's in terms of age, like it is very relatable to me, and yeah, I would agree with what Robert said. Is just the abruptness of it all, just the suddenness, and it is something that you do feel a lot with. I mean, a lot of tragic stories in general, but especially those World War II and especially either soldierly or resistant stories of those, in many cases, very young people who you can feel, and this is definitely the case with Violette, and you know, her buying the dresses in Paris, and just although for, you know, for a woman of such a young age, she'd already gone through quite a lot of tragic moments with the death of her husband, especially. Um, but you know, there is a joie de vivre, there is a liveliness to her that you do feel throughout the book, and this very abrupt ending is just, yes, it's not demoralizing, I would say, but there is something both, yes, awe-inspiring, but also a little bit terrifying, I would say, just about these stories in general, because and Violette in particular, because you know, I suppose I still feel pretty young, but you're also reminded that, you know, yeah, death might just be at the corner. That's although we're not in the Second World War, but you know, in a pandemic kind of time, we are reminded that these things can happen. So yes, I would say, yes, I suppose that's the way it made me felt. That, you know, you follow her through her journey, and even the last journey to Germany, and perhaps this is something that was felt by thousands during the Second World War. This journey to Germany was awful, but it was perhaps just yet another journey. You don't know that is the final journey until the end is there, but is here. But but the end comes so fast as well. So yes, it mixed feelings, I would say, but gripping, definitely.
Mhm. We have not much time left. Maybe a last question, maybe in French for Paul about the translation. Donc Paul, vous avez parlé donc des difficultés de la traduction. Qu'est-ce que vous avez privilégié? Alors, est-ce que ça va être le sens, la forme poétique, la musique de la langue? Vous en avez parlé un petit peu, hein, des difficultés de la traduction. Moi, il y a une chose qui m'avait marqué quand j'ai vu le texte, en particulier les midges. Je me suis demandé, mais comment est-ce qu'il a traduit ça? Qu'est-ce que vous avez privilégié?
Merci beaucoup, Catherine. Oui, c'est une bonne question. C'est vrai que Midges, on aurait presque pu le laisser en anglais. Ça fait partie de ces choix qu'il a fallu faire, par exemple dans
Ouais.
la
Mais
première
ça marche
partie.
bien, Moucheron, hein.
Je pense que
Moucheron,
moucheron, ça
c'est
marche.
bien,
Oui,
hein. Ouais.
oui, oui, c'est quand même assez énervant, les moucherons, en
Ouais.
français aussi. Oui. Bon, les midges, c'est quand même, presque un niveau au-dessus. Donc, c'est vrai que c'était là que ça pouvait se discuter. Mais bon, euh, je pense qu'il faut quand même avoir été en Écosse pour saisir le mot midges. Donc, bon, pour un lectorat francophone plus vaste, il fallait moucheron. Mais voilà, c'est le genre de discussion là, vraiment très, très technique, quoi, qu'il a fallu que j'ai un peu avec moi-même en termes au cas par cas, quand on avait un cas comme ça, de quelque chose de très marquant dans la culture ou écossaise ou britannique. Il y avait des noms, par exemple, dans la première partie, il y a des noms de pubs, par exemple. Donc là, dans ce cas-là, avec l'éditeur aussi, on a décidé de garder les titres en anglais, mais ça pouvait potentiellement se traduire en français. Bon. Mais quand il s'agit de mon approche plus générale, euh, ce que j'ai essayé de faire, c'est vraiment de privilégier et je dirais, c'est sans doute mon approche traductrice en général, de privilégier la forme et les sonorités du poème. Bien sûr, en étant le plus fidèle possible à l'original, c'est quand même l'objectif d'une traduction, mais en portant, oui, en étant particulièrement attentif à respecter euh, une forme de la musicalité du poème. Parce que Robert l'a dit, c'est vrai qu'on est dans une forme CV, il y a un objectif presque de sonorité bureaucratique, administrative. Donc parfois, il y a clairement une volonté de ne pas faire du joli, de ne pas faire du beau, mais il n'empêche, euh, il y a une musique qui s'installe dans les listes. Et puis aussi, on a clairement, et on a discuté avec Robert, il y a clairement aussi il y a des allitérations, il y a des rimes cachées. Et voilà, il y a quand même un travail, il y a une texture poétique du poème. dont il m'a semblé que la tâche m'incombait véritablement de retranscrire. Et donc, voilà, j'ai aussi essayé de faire un effort en termes de, soit quand il y avait vraiment des allitérations ou des assonances ou des rimes très claires dans l'original, d'essayer de trouver des équivalents en français pour jouer avec la musicalité du texte. Soit parfois, c'est vrai qu'il y avait aussi des moments dans la traduction elle-même où où il semblait assez évident qu'on puisse jouer un peu avec les mots, qu'on puisse ajouter une couleur spécifiquement française à la traduction. Donc ça fait partie des plaisirs en tant que traducteur, où c'est vrai qu'on a une petite marge, mais qui existe de création aussi. Donc je me suis fait un peu plaisir par moment, mais voilà, tout en restant le plus proche possible de l'original, mais qui, c'est vrai, avec ses espaces, avec ses grandes listes, avec ses citations, offrait, mine de rien, une marge de manœuvre et de créativité assez importante. Voilà, donc comme dit Verlaine, mon approche, c'est quand même la musique avant toute chose. Donc, c'est ce que j'ai essayé de faire.
D'accord. Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup à tous les deux pour cette magnifique présentation, cette magnifique lecture. Donc, Curriculum Violette est disponible, donc publié chez Molecular Press et disponible chez tous les bons libraires. Voilà. Laurence, voulez-vous ajouter quelque chose? Non?
There's nothing to add, really. Thank you very much. It was a discovery for me as well, and I really enjoyed it very much. I was very moved also by the. I think you were really right to choose this approach to let also the reader imagine her life through the 5 CVs, and I was moved by the things carried that showed that although she was a spy and a very courageous, brave woman, she was also a young woman carrying her mother's needle and thread, and I found that particularly moving. And well, I will just say she's had a very intense but very short life, and I wish your book a very long and intense life. So and a lot of success, and I'm sure the success it deserves.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much again, and I wish you all the best for Curriculum Violette in England, I mean in the UK, but also in France. I think it would be really, really good to have it spread all over France, because she's not that well known, and it's a pity. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Merci.
Merci.
Merci. Et à bientôt.
Thank you, everyone.
Merci beaucoup.
Encore pour
Merci.
Bonne soirée à tout le monde. Bye bye.